But most Syrians don't have friends, relatives in the United States, so you'll be arbitrarily assigned. You'll be arbitrarily assigned to any state in the country. There are refugee resettlement agencies in every state. You might even be lucky enough to be assigned to a state. The name is kind of funny and you can't pronounce it. Connecticut. Pack your bags, you're going to Connecticut. So while you're getting all excited about it, oh, there's one more step. You have to sign a promissory note to repay the loan for the airfare to get you to Connecticut. Who's groaning and moaning? Come on, it's the American way. Not gonna be a free ride. You know, we send a message to refugees even before they arrive here. I'm sounding like my father now. Tough Greek American. We send a message to refugees before they even arrive that this is a modestly funded, tough, demanding program. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We're not going to lavish all kinds of assistance on you. And you realize that when you're told you need to take out, it's a no-interest loan, nevertheless, a loan to cover your airfare. I mean, Abdullah's thinking, damn, I've been living in a refugee camp for 4 years. I haven't been allowed to work. I tried to work once and the Jordanian police, picked me up and almost arrested me. We spent all of our savings. We have no money at all. We're deep into debt. And now I've got to take out a loan to cover my airfare. That's how it works. Every refugee who comes to this country takes out a loan to cover their airfare. I know. I was shocked when I learned that 12 years ago. You're getting ready. You're packing your bags. Meanwhile, over here in New Haven, Connecticut, at my desk, at my computer, a message comes up. A lovely family of 3 from Syria, Abdullah, Fatima, and Selwa, are arriving in 2 weeks. Refugee agencies typically have 2, sometimes 3 weeks notice to get ready for the arrival of a refugee family. And what do we have to do? We have to run out and find an apartment. This will probably a 1-bedroom apartment will be fine. You'll squeeze into a 1-bedroom, that should be fine. A 1-bedroom apartment, we have to furnish it with donated furniture. Some of you, maybe many of you, have donated furniture to us. Thank you very much. We have to stock the kitchen with about 4 days worth of food. And then some of you have heard me say this before, I love this part of the refugee resettlement program. We have to find someone in the community who can cook a culturally appropriate hot meal to serve this Syrian family. A Syrian dish, a hot dish, Syrian food, to serve them within 2 hours of their arrival. A U.S. government requirement. I can see in her eyes, she's never going to criticize the government again. If all of our regulations, who are the elected officials here? If all of our laws and statutes and regulations could be as sensible and rooted in compassion as that. All right, so we get all that ready. We get one more email that says they're arriving in JFK at 6:30 in the evening. They'll probably arrive in New Haven at around 9:30 or 10. There'll be one more security check in the airport. Fatima's saying, well, when are these security checks going to end? And then you'll be met by someone from the United Nations at JFK. They put you in a little minivan. You zip up I-95, and my case manager and an interpreter will meet you at the train station or maybe the old Connecticut limo station on Long Wharf Drive. It's a nice place. It's always dark, it's always cold, and very empty. And this little minivan pulls up, and the family kind of comes tumbling out. Selwa is crying and cranky. Fatima looks pretty bewildered. Abdullah is trying to keep a stiff upper lip, And the case manager says, welcome to New Haven, welcome to Iris. Welcome to Connecticut, you hear pronounced properly for the first time in your life. And then we bundle you up in winter coats and hats and scarves and gloves and things like that. And we take you to your nice warm apartment. You have that culturally appropriate hot meal. It's probably been cooked by a Syrian refugee family that arrived, months earlier. They were thrilled to be able to prepare a welcome meal for you. You have a good night's sleep. The furniture, by the way, it's all used except one important item, the mattresses. Yes, they're brand new. You have brand new mattresses, thanks to the bed bug epidemic that has swept through the country. And you have a good night's sleep, and then the next day, the case manager will come back and pick you up and bring you to the office. And we'll sit you down, and we'll go over the program. This is happening all over the country now. As I speak, there are refugees arriving at airports. Culturally appropriate hot meals are being consumed. Now, interpreters and case managers are greeting refugees as they arrive. You're brought into the office a day or two after you arrive. We sit you down and we say, okay, here is the program. We're going to immediately take care of Selwa. Yale New Haven Hospital has been wonderful. They have set up dedicated hours and staff to help refugees. They call it a refugee clinic. We'll get you into that immediately and see what's going on. They have psychiatrists, different languages, it's great. Fatima and Abdullah have been neglecting their health needs. Worried so much about their 5-year-old daughter. So we'll take care of your health issues as well. Abdullah's got a terrible abscessed tooth. He's had, been in pain for months. We've got dentists who offer pro bono services. I mean, people are just coming out of the woodwork to help refugees. It's just been wonderful. We'll talk more about that. So, healthcare we'll take care of. We'll help you enroll Selwa in school. She's 5 years old. What is that, kindergarten, first grade, something like that? We've got an education team that'll get her enrolled in school. We're going to help you learn English. You don't speak English. You really can't get a job unless you know some words of English. So, Abdullah, I know that you were looking forward to opening a used clothing shop in New Haven. Probably won't be able to as your first job. Don't get discouraged, though. You'll be lucky if you're offered a job as a dishwasher at Archie Moore's Bar and Grill. Who's eating there? Archie Moore. So, you're not so sure about that because Abdullah comes from a country where, jobs are divided into two categories, honorable and maybe not so honorable. And it's not the way we look at work here, is it? No. That's not how my dad raised me. Everything is honest work. And the dirtier you get, the more honest it is. So, you're offered a job as a dishwasher. In fact, true story. One of our first Syrian refugees to arrive was offered a job as a dishwasher at Archie Moore's. He's working there now. And Jim, the manager, says he's the best dishwasher he's ever had. So you take a job there washing dishes. Fatima has pretty much accepted that she's going to have to work part-time to make ends meet because, we're going to cover your expenses for the first 3, maybe 4 months. But after that, you've got to start covering your rent and other expenses. You're going to be on your own. It's a tough program. But Abdullah does so well as a dishwasher at Archie Moore's. They give him a raise. They increase his hours, which allows you to go to Gateway Community College and continue studying English. So your first job might be a little higher than minimum wage. So you guys are doing well. Now, not every family does this well. Some need a little more help than others. Selwa is amazing. Selwa is loved by everybody at the school. The teachers are just, all doting over her. And she's worked out the PTSD or whatever it was that was bothering her. She's learning English faster than her 2 parents put together. She's become the family interpreter. Whenever anyone comes over to the house, her mom grabs her over. Any immigrant children here or Yes, you know what it's like then, right? You're the family interpreter, you're pulled in to translate for everything, but you make it. And that's, again, what's happening all over the country now. People are getting first jobs. Women who've never worked outside the home are proudly showing their first paycheck to their case manager. It's an amazing program. And with a stroke of a pen, our new president has tried to bring it to a halt. So, what's happened recently? Well, before I get into the executive orders, let me tell you what's going on in Connecticut. What I described was the resettlement process, the way it works at most resettlement agencies. How many are there? 350. Spread all across the country. There are 3 in Connecticut. There's one in Hartford, there's one in Bridgeport, and we're based in New Haven. Usually it is the staff, employees, and a bunch of volunteers, individual volunteers, who do the work that I just described. You know, connect you to health care, show you how to ride the bus, enroll the kids in school, help you learn English, help you find a job. All of that is usually done by staff and then individual volunteers. But there's this older model. I referred to it when I talked about 1980, when 200,000 refugees, mostly from Southeast Asia, came to the United States. There's an older approach to refugee resettlement. It's called community co-sponsorship. Or if you're talking only about churches, it's called church co-sponsorship. But I don't want the churches to have all the fun. We've expanded it to include any group, and it's not just faith-based groups. Synagogues, mosques, churches. Again, it should not be limited to the faith-based group. Anyone should be allowed, should be invited to get involved. Community co-sponsorship is when a group of people from a community get together, usually a group of, I don't know, 15, 20, 30, and I know that there are members of groups in the room right now. They get together, they approach me at Iris, they knock on the door and they say, Chris, we want to welcome a refugee family to our neighborhood. Yes, we've done fundraisers and we've written checks for you. We've gathered used furniture for you. And by the way, all that is very important. We need that, even more now than ever before. But, this group says, we want to do the ultimate, the full Monty. We want a refugee family in our neighborhood. A Muslim Syrian refugee family in our neighborhood. Of course, they can't be picky and you know, get exactly what they want. They just say refugee, and we say, okay, we'll see. Over the past 10 years, an average of 2 groups a year would knock on the door of Iris and say, we want to be a community co-sponsor. 2 groups a year on average. Since October 2015, we now have 60 groups, 60. 60 groups from all over the state of Connecticut, from Salisbury, which I didn't even know was in Connecticut, in Litchfield County, to the Quiet Corner, come down the coast, New London, Old Lyme, help me out, Guilford, Branford, all over Madison, all over New Haven, jump up to Middletown, Hartford, Bloomfield, Glastonbury, West Hartford. There are all sorts of groups in West Hartford. Jump back down to Greenwich, Stamford, Brookfield, Ridgefield, all over the state. Danbury, all over the state, groups have stepped forward to welcome refugees. So, this was materializing, and my phone was ringing off the hook. You remember what the rhetoric was like during the campaign. So you've got at the national level all this horrible stuff being said about refugees, especially after the Paris terrorist attack in November, which refugees had nothing to do with, but rumors were spread, and there was fear-mongering, and you know, candidates running for public office felt that, you know, yes, we find a boogeyman. We find someone to blame for all of our problems. Make it the refugees. Make it the Muslims. And before you knew it, what was really the highest level of compassion and support, which was in the summer of 2015, just plummeted. And before you know it, there were governors from all over the country saying, we don't want Syrian refugees. We don't want Iraqi refugees. 30 of them. Not our governor, though. Our governor knows his Constitution. And whatever you think of Governor Malloy, he is a big supporter of the refugee program. He knows what the Constitution says, and he did his homework about the vetting process. So his response, when he was asked by journalists, well, what's Connecticut going to do about all these Syrian and Iraqi refugees? He said, we will welcome refugees who have been selected by the State Department, vetted by Department of Homeland Security, from any country to the great state of Connecticut. We will not discriminate on the basis of their religion or their race or their nationality. So you all remember that famous case. There was a family of 3 Syrians that were supposed to go to Indianapolis. The Governor Pence at the time said, no, I'm not going to welcome them. And instead, they came here. And the New York Times headline was, Syrian refugee family rejected by Indiana, welcomed by Connecticut. So we were getting all of this support, 60 community groups. We were getting all kinds of contributions. So where's Washington? So I turned to Washington again. Stand up, Washington. I turned to Washington, D.C. again, and I said, you know, last year, Iris resettled, last year was 2015. In 2015, we resettled 240 refugees. Now I've got all this amazing community support from all over the state of Connecticut. Send us twice as many. So Washington got that request from us, and they thought we were crazy. There's no refugee agency that size that would ever ask for twice as many refugees. We did because of you. And for the first time in my life, Washington did exactly what I asked it to do. They sent us 530 refugees in 2016. 200 of them were welcomed by community groups, and then the other 330 we resettled in the greater New Haven area. So that's what's been happening in Connecticut. We were prepared to welcome another 500 this year, 2017, and in fact the State Department process was sending pretty much at the pace of 110,000, well, let me back up. I'm confusing you with all these numbers. I'm confusing myself with all these numbers. One of President Obama's last decisions regarding refugees was to increase the number from 85,000 to 110. He did that in autumn last year, just before a United Nations conference. He wanted to be able to sit at the United Nations table and have some moral authority and influence and say, look, we're bringing 110,000 refugees to the United States in 2017. What are you doing, Australia? And how about you, France? And how about you? Well, Germany, fine. You're Canada, I can't argue with you, Canada. But there are several countries that could step up. When we're bringing large numbers of refugees, we have some influence with them. So that was the number, 110,000, and we had been receiving refugees pretty much at that pace until the executive order was signed. And the executive order was signed, it was a dark day for refugees. It was the 27th of January, Friday, January 27th. And did a number of things. I'll quickly summarize that. It banned all travel from those 7 countries, mostly Muslim countries. all travel, not just refugees, but any immigrant. They had to quickly change that because they realized, oh my God, we've got all these green card holders. We have to let them come. So it was immediately amended to allow green card holders to come in. It was also amended to allow Iraqi refugees who had served with our troops in Iraq, and that's why their lives were in danger, allowed them to come in through a special immigrant visa program. Then the courts also stepped in, and you know what happened. The Circuit Court, the Ninth Circuit Court, thank you, decided that it was not legal to restrict any immigrants or refugees from those countries, so they've been allowed in. The other thing that the executive order did was it wanted to stop the entire refugee program. That's all refugees. Burmese, Bhutanese, Congolese. We're not talking, just Muslims from Syria. I'm not talking just Abdullah, Fatima, and Salwa from Syria. We're talking about all refugees around the world. They wanted to put a freeze on that program for 4 months, an indefinite freeze on all of the Syrian refugees. It was going to, the executive order also called for giving more authority, more power to governors and municipal leaders to decide whether they want to accept refugees in their states and municipalities. That sounds reasonable, but if you kind of play it out, it could be problematic. And then the executive order also stated that the U.S. refugee program, when it restarts, would give higher priority to religious minorities, which is a way of bringing more Christians here. Now, last year's 85,000 was roughly 50% Christian and 50% Muslim. The 85,000 refugees who came to the United States last year, I know you've heard a lot of things from a lot of different people. Oh, we don't bring any Christian refugees to the United States. That's not true. It's roughly 50% of the 85,000 refugees who came to the United States were Christian. But I think, the most devastating assault on the refugee program was not the things I mentioned, which are all going to be challenged, have been, will be challenged in court. It's the reduction in the total number of refugees from 110,000 to 50,000. That's 60,000 refugees who were going to come to the United States through this process that I described, with the same kinds of dreams and hopes and potential to enrich this country, strengthen our economy that this lovely family has. 60,000 people were not going to come to the United States who had been originally included in the 110,000. That translates to about 15,000 families. 15,000 families like this would not be coming to the United States this year. Can that be challenged by a court? We're not so sure, although, any lawyers in the room? Oh no, you should. I love lawyers and our independent judiciary. Right after that Ninth Circuit decision was made, I ran to my garage, grabbed my American flag. I think it was a rainy day, it didn't matter, and I stuck it in front of my house. Never been more proud. So we're not sure that that attorneys general in any of the states that have cases against the administration will have a chance to challenge and win that reduction from 110,000 to 50. There is a tiny hope, though. I spoke with a law professor from Yale a couple of days ago, and he said the language of the law that gives the United States president authority to determine the number of refugees coming into the country, the word they use is the president has the responsibility to set the goal in consultation with the State Department and then inform Congress? Well, a president, Obama, set the goal. There's nowhere in the law that says the president has the authority to reduce it. So that might be a way it could be legally challenged. I don't know. I'm not going to hold my breath that the courts can have an effect on that. I am placing my faith in you all and people like you all across the country who will tell their elected representatives, hey, welcoming persecuted people from all over the world is the best thing this country does. It makes us strong, it strengthens the economy, it diversifies our neighborhoods, it helps us understand the world, it saves their lives, enriches our lives. It's what this country has always done. The Statue of Liberty is the symbol. Albert Einstein is our poster child. It's as American as apple pie and baseball, and we have got to do it. Sure, there are bad people out there who want to hurt us. If the two of you say you're bad dudes and you're drinking tea or coffee in Kabul or in Baghdad or in Damascus, and you were plotting ways to do damage in the United States, you would not say, hey, let's go to the United States through the Refugee Resettlement Program and go through that vetting process. You'd be crazy. No, yeah. Right, so the vetting, of course we have to have a vetting. Look, honestly, I've lived in the Middle East. I've had to pull my kids out of schools because there was too many car bombs going off and suicide bombers. Security, safety is very real, very personal for me. Of course we have to be careful. Of course we have to vet refugees. And if there's ever any doubt, like I explained, they should not be allowed to come in. The vetting process, if you look back to 2001, 800,000 refugees have come, 800,000 refugees have come through the vetting process that I described. Not a single American has been killed by refugees who've come to the United States through that process in a terrorist attack here in this country. Questions at the end, but save it. So that's where we stand now. Of course, we've got security concerns. Of course, we need to have a vetting process, but welcoming refugees is such an important part of this country's heritage, our most noble tradition, our finest foreign policy, right up there with Peace Corps. We do not want to just throw it all away unless there's a really good reason. It has been paused at times. The Department of Homeland Security has tightened up their vetting process at times for Iraqis. They didn't bring it to a complete halt, but they did slow it down. That's all valid. So that's where we stand now. Our hope is that the new executive order will be more reasonable. Our hope is that we can get those numbers up. Our hope is that we can continue to share our Connecticut experience of using community groups to welcome refugees with the rest of the country. Imagine if this was happening, it's happening here in Connecticut, if it were happening in every state. It's not. You guys realize? I mean, I said there are 60 groups that have approached us. Already we've placed refugee families with about 45 groups. It's not happening in any other state. No, it is not. Not at that level. Nope. And why? A lot of people ask me why. What is it about Connecticut? Well, I don't think Don't get mad at me. I don't think you're more compassionate than other Americans and others. And you're not smarter. I'm sorry. I'm from Iowa. I grew up in New Jersey. You know, there are loyalties there. But there are three things. There is an experience and a commitment, an experience with and a commitment to diversity and welcoming people and welcoming refugees that is very rich here and deep here in Connecticut. I think you might be better informed than people in other places, so you understand. Now, definitely you are. You know what the vetting process is. And the other thing is, and I've got to take a little responsibility for this, you are aware of this community co-sponsorship program. We have promoted it, we've marketed it, we have told everyone who listens to us about it, so you know where to come if you want to welcome a refugee family to your community. A community group in Wichita might not be aware of it, or in Louisville might not be aware of it. So those are the differences. So it's getting late, it's about 8 o'clock. I've talked enough. Probably take some questions. How's that?
Sure. Do we have a mic available? Great.
But I asked a woman back here to hold her question, so she might want to go first. Can you just shout?
Yeah, I can shout.
Shout!
No
Shout at me!
problem. So I'm not challenging you, and I am on your side, but I want to play devil's advocate and ask how San Bernardino happened. Why didn't anybody check her Facebook page?
Well, first of all, neither of them were refugees. Neither of them came through the refugee resettlement program. Neither of them went through this intensive, extreme vetting process.
Okay.
Yeah. There are easier ways to get into this country. There are, you know, most people in Europe can get in without a visa. They get a visa at the airport. So that's what needs to be tightened up. Refugee resettlement vetting process is already really tight. Sure, we could always make it tighter, and we might. Other ways of getting in are not so tight. The screening process, the vetting process for those people needs to be tightened.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can I make a note on that?
Sure.
My sister happened to marry
Microphone?
Yeah, sorry. My sister happened to marry a German
Stand up here.
in 2016. And he was at one time even had a green card because he worked in this country for several years. And then he went back to Germany, didn't need the green card anymore. So a few decades later, 18 months and many, many, many interviews before he was allowed to come to this country. And I can tell you that he has, as far as everybody knows, a completely clean, you know, record. And surprisingly, interestingly actually, he was a refugee himself in Germany. He escaped from Hungary in 1956, running through the woods, being shot at as a young teenager.
I just want to say the last thing on the Connecticut
Stand up,
response
please.
is we trust Iris.
It's not on.
Well, thank you.
It's not, I think that's really important.
If you point the microphone forward.
What'd you say?
When you speak, please
Said we
stand.
trust Iris.
Yeah.
Well, we try to be open and transparent. I mean, that's our style. Look, we make mistakes. Resettling refugees is really tough. This is the hardest job I've ever had. Some days I wish I was back in the Gaza Strip, where life was so much easier. By the way, I told you I was from Gaza on. I've been called Abu Susanna. Susanna was 1 year old in the Gaza Strip. Now she's 31, and she's a foreign correspondent for the Associated Press. She is in Baghdad. So there's the irony of the world, right? I'm welcoming refugees who have fled Iraq, and my daughter, little Susanna, not little anymore, is there covering the crisis. You'll hear her on NPR every now and then. Yes.
I just have a question. It seems-
Microphone.
I don't need the microphone.
Yes,
There seems to be public opinion that when we accept all these refugees and immigrants, that it's gonna affect our welfare system. How do we change that? Because you hear a lot on the social media, if we take these people in, they're sucking my taxes.
Yeah.
That seems to be a very big complaint.
Yes. So, yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Refugees receive, when they arrive, $950 as a one-time Welcome to America grant. It's called, they refer to it as welcome money. That comes from the State Department. $925 per person, $925, $950, $950. We use that for first month's rent, security deposit, and doesn't last much longer. You're also eligible for, all refugees are eligible for, and this touches on your question, food stamps, cash assistance, if the waiting lists aren't that long, subsidized housing, and 8 months of health insurance. If your family has if you have a child in your family, then you're eligible for ongoing health assistance through the Husky program, what we call it in Connecticut. So, yes, that does cost money. It's an investment, and it's probably the best use of our tax dollars ever. The money that we receive from the federal government to run the program is not that much. It's $925 per refugee that we receive to cover my office, operating costs, my staff. But that money leverages about $4. Every dollar of federal money that a refugee resettlement agency receives generates about $4 worth of financial donations, volunteer time, furniture. So it is probably the most effective public-private partnership that this country has ever seen. It is, you know, the initial selection and regulations come from the federal government, but all the work on the ground is done by private voluntary organizations, nonprofits, and before you know it, they're on their feet and they're generating income. They are entrepreneurs. All the studies show that 50% of the new businesses started in this country started by immigrants. Certain cities and towns have been lifted out of their, ruins by refugee resettlement. The New York Times just did a story on it. A couple of Rochester, New York, Buffalo, and help me out, what was the other one? Syracuse also. New Haven, our refugee resettlement program isn't large enough for you to see that kind of an impact, but our budget's $2.5 million. Almost all that money is spent in Connecticut. So, we're paying landlords, we're hiring people. It is an excellent program, tax money well spent. It's an investment in people who are motivated, want to work, and contribute to this country. And of course, they're taxpayers, right? Yes.
Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
First of all, I want to send my greetings out to all my fellow returned Peace Corps volunteers. Yay, we're good. And I wanted to point out two things that have happened that I am very familiar with. I just came back 4 years ago from the Gambia, which is in West Africa and has been in the news a lot lately because their former president took some lessons from our current president, who also thinks elections are rigged. But nonetheless, and the per capita income there is under $400 a year. And I came home 4 years ago, so I bumped the average age of the volunteer to 26. But if you have not seen Frontline's documentary called Exodus, it is excellent. And it really hit a chord with me because 1 in 5 of those refugees coming across the Mediterranean come from the Gambia. The other thing that I just wanted to point out is, if you're not familiar with the Southern Poverty Law Center, you absolutely should.
Here, the black blouse and then the red blouse and the.
Please give them a microphone.
Does the vetting process in any way
Stand up and shout.
does the vetting process in any way take into account trauma and mental illness? Because they're asking questions that would be very difficult for an average person to answer, and obviously they've gone through severe trauma, which would impact their memory.
You mean, do they hold back because the question might elicit a traumatic response? I don't think they do. I think they need to get the information. When President Trump said repeatedly, I'm trying to be very neutral and objective here, just repeating what he said. When President Trump said repeatedly, refugees just flood into this country and they're not vetted. Over and over and over again he was saying that. There was a cumulative effect, and finally, you might have heard the reports on NPR or read the op-ed in the Washington Post or the articles in the New York Times. Vetters, Department of Homeland Security vetters finally spoke out. And they said, this is nonsense. They said, we question people, to get to your question, Miss, said we question people to the point where they break down. That's not our intention, but we've got to ask them questions. And, you know, we go through boxes and boxes of tissue. So, and they describe the process as, you know, being, you know, again, 18 to 24 months, the kinds of questions, the forensic checks on all the documents. And then they also said, which is so key, at the end of the process, if there are any doubts, they're off the list. So it is now finally getting some attention. But I don't know. These things are said and people just believe it. Red shirt in the back, sorry.
So I was wondering, I've heard over and over again, they're going to do extreme vetting, because that's
Yes.
what's necessary, extreme vetting. But no one ever says, and reporters never ask, what is extreme vetting? And so I was wondering, in your opinion, I mean, what more can be done? Can you hear me or not?
Put that mic right in your mouth.
What more can be done to vet them? Are you going to make them wait 3 years? Are you going to ask more
Right.
questions?
Well-
What does that even mean?
I think it is extreme vetting without anything, without any details to define it, is on that rather long list of things that have been said that maybe don't make a lot of sense or can't be backed up by facts. I've also said, you know, show me where the weaknesses are in the vetting process. And I'm sure the Department of Homeland Security staff have said, show us where we need to tighten things up. We're more than happy to consider that. The vetting process is already extreme. I honestly don't know where that came from, and no one has explained. In fact, if you listen to the live audio feed, the 9th Circuit Court questioning the lawyers for the administration, they were asked by the judges, what is the basis, the security basis, the security reasons for your decision to stop the refugee program for 4 months? And they didn't have it. They didn't have the answer. Okay, help me out here. I can't keep track of who put their hands up. Back here to the first row. I need a spotter.
So, in the context of the current reality, or at least the fluid sort of thought about reality that might unfold, what do you need most from us?
All right, so what do refugee resettlements, let's extend it across the country to the 350 refugee resettlement, the whole refugee resettlement program. What do they need? Well, advocacy. As I said before, contact your elected officials. And even if our elected officials have all been supportive, we have elected officials here. Don't you like to hear thank you, positive, hey, I really like that decision you made, not just complaints. So send a note to Murphy and Blumenthal and say, really like your strong position on the refugee program. And if you've got friends and family who live in states with elected officials who are not so supportive, educate them. If there's one thing I've learned, no, somebody said good luck, but seriously, if there's one thing I've learned over these almost 12 years of doing refugee work, education really matters. The people who are saying, we don't want to let any more refugees in, or there's no vetting, they're just pouring into this country and nobody knows who they are, they don't know. They need to understand the process, really understand the vetting part of the process, and then imagine if they were part of a community that resettled a Syrian family. Imagine if their kids were going to school with refugees, if they helped find a job for a Syrian refugee or an Iraqi refugee, if they helped teach an Afghan family English, they'd have a much different perspective on this. So I really do, I'm not being naive. I've seen it happen. That education, involvement with a refugee family can make all the difference. So it's another reason why I love this community co-sponsorship approach. It's not just the best way for a refugee family to start a new life in this country. It's a great way for a community to get to know refugees. And they will support the program in the future. Refugee resettlement is not funded from state budgets. I don't think anywhere in the country. There may be a couple of states that have allocated some funding to refugee resettlement. It comes from the federal government, State Department, and then also some funding from the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement. Nothing from state in most cases, not in Connecticut. The state has never given us a penny. That's okay, because of you. We get a lot of generous donations from you. I have to say, I feel a little guilty when I'm talking to refugee resettlement directors from some of those other 350 agencies across the country. Their budgets are being slashed because when you reduce the number of refugees coming to this country by 60%, you're reducing the number of refugees arriving at that little refugee resettlement agency in Louisville by 60%. That means you're cutting 60% of that State Department allocation. They're laying off staff. Now, that's not the worst thing. That's not the worst part of this executive order. The worst part is that those 15,000 refugee families aren't coming here. But when refugee agencies start to lay off staff, they lose capacity. If the number does go back up, it's just going to be that much more difficult. I said I feel a little bad talking to them because of you, we can maintain our staff throughout the year. I don't have to lay off anyone. Thank God, because we welcomed so many refugees last year. We have a lot of work to do this year. I usually say in gatherings like this, IRIS is your refugee resettlement agency. I've been saying it for years. And so I know some people probably roll their eyes and say, it's just rhetoric. You know, he runs it, he's got a board of directors. What do you mean it's ours? Well, I honestly think the people of Connecticut have begun to hear that and take it seriously. You feel a degree of responsibility for refugee resettlement work in your state. You want it to be strong. You want us to survive this craziness out of Washington. And because of you, we will. We will. And I'm hopeful that the numbers will go back up at some point. And hopefully, you know, we don't have to wait that long. One more direct effect. I was going to say indirect. It's really a direct effect. I mentioned that the U.S. government has historically had, for many, many years, the largest refugee resettlement program in the world. We used to have, as our 2017 number, 110,000 refugees. That gave us some authority, moral authority and influence over other countries. We don't have that anymore. I'd like to think that those other countries might step up and increase their refugee resettlement programs, but I don't think they will. I think they might kind of look to the United States and say, they're not bringing more refugees, why should we? So the number of refugees resettled has always been a tiny fraction of the total number of refugees. Usually the millions just sweat it out in refugee camps or other places. But the number of refugees resettled is going to get even smaller if the US doesn't get its act together and play a leadership role in helping save the lives of refugees. And what happens to refugees who lose hope that they'll ever be resettled? They do desperate things, like placing Selwa on an inflatable raft on the shore of Turkey in the hope of making it to an island in the Mediterranean, taking your chances. People will die as a result of this executive order. There's no doubt. So, yes?
Once the refugees are here, does the Department of Homeland Security still have a hold on them? And is the status provisional in any way?
When refugees arrive, they are legal residents. They're all eligible and encouraged, actually required to apply for the green card, which is the legal permanent residency, after they've been here a year. And then 5 years after they arrive, they're eligible to apply for citizenship. So refugees, when they come to this country, they are the most documented legal immigrant around, and they're all on track to become naturalized U.S. citizens. The Department of Homeland Security doesn't track them or keep tabs on them. They're free to go wherever they want. They can arrive in New Haven on a Monday and fly to, Los Angeles on Tuesday if they want. The FBI is in touch with us on a regular basis, and the FBI does knock on doors of refugees now and then to see how things are going, make sure they haven't been victims of hate crimes, things like that. So, they aren't tracked or monitored or traced. We have laws that kind of discourage that, but they are, if they want to register for government assistance, of course, they'd have to check into the Los Angeles Department of Social Service office when they get there. Yep.
Is it only families that are welcomed?
Is it only families? It's almost entirely families. Very few of the 530 refugees that we welcomed last year were single men. I think only 3, and I think they were from Afghanistan and Iraq. They had worked as interpreters for our military. Yes, we are focusing on families in our refugee resettlement program, here and then there.
There are a lot of people, as we talked about, that are here illegally, that have gotten into the country in some other way.
Yes.
Is there anything that is being done for them in any kind of an organized way? Because some of them are just as desperate.
Yes.
They're scared to death.
Yes. Undocumented immigrants are definitely have reason to be very worried. Some of our refugee clients are scared to death they're going to be rounded up and deported, and I say no. You're legal residents. You don't need to worry about that. Undocumented immigrants, of course, don't have that protection. Most of them will not be able to make a claim before an immigration judge that they are refugees, that they will suffer persecution if they're sent back to the country they came from. But we have to deal with them in a humanitarian way. And some of them have kids who were born in this country. So when are we going to have immigration reform that that will finally address our needs and specifically the needs of the 11 million or so undocumented immigrants? There are nonprofits in New Haven that work specifically with Spanish-speaking undocumented immigrants Junta for Progressive Action, and there's one with a Spanish name, Unidad Latina Acción. So if you want to offer your services to them, I'd be happy to introduce you to them. We have some programs that welcome undocumented immigrants at IRIS. We have a once a week food pantry. We used to not ask people their immigration status who wanted to be in our after-school program. We've got so many refugees, we've had to limit it to refugees recently. And we're contemplating opening up our legal services program to undocumented immigrants as well. Yeah, I worry about that, but you know, we hear contradictory stuff every day. One day, you know, we're gonna round them up and use the military to do it. And then the other day we say, no, you know, someone in the government says, no, there aren't gonna be any roundups and mass deportations. Oh, it's it's exhausting, isn't it? Yes?
I imagine, excuse me, I imagine you have various metrics for success. One might be, has anyone failed to pay their airfare? Repay their airfare?
That is a good indicator. 70% repay their travel loan. It's a very long process, so they charge. 70% repay the travel loan within the first, I think, 5 years. I'll go back and check that number, but it's not bad. Yeah, there are some people who don't pay it. And, you know, it's a shame because that's part of their credit history. The most important metric or indicator of success, and by the way, I should have mentioned it, the whole point of a refugee resettlement program is to give refugees a good start. We don't support them forever. I mean, Abdullah got his full-time job at Archie Moore's and we haven't seen him for months. Fatima's going to Gateway to study English. We don't see her anymore. You know, Selwa, we might see her every now, our education coordinator might see Selwa every now and then. So, you know, once they get going, we don't really see them. But the whole point is to help them become self-sufficient. And you know what the biggest problem I have with these wonderful community groups that I've talked so positively about? Yeah, you guessed it. They want to do too much for too long for these refugees. You know, everyone wants to hold Selma. Everyone wants to, you know, tutor her in English, and everyone, you know, nobody, they've gone through a lot. I mean, it's tough. So nobody wants to push too hard on Abdullah to get a job. And, you know, well, we've got the money. We can pay the rent for a couple more months. No, we said. You've got to be tough. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. That's your second question. Yes?
So when you describe the vetting process, does the department, it's the State Department that selects the families originally? Families that are fleeing war don't automatically pack their birth certificates, their marriage certificates, and their passports.
Yeah.
So say this family didn't have Selwa's birth certificate.
Yeah.
Say husband and wife didn't have their marriage certificate. Are they automatically going to be rejected?
They have a tougher chance. They're not automatically rejected. You're right. Some refugees, you know, sitting watching TV, having dinner, and then all hell breaks loose in their town, gunshots all over the place, the lights go out, they just grab their children and they run, sometimes in different directions. I've talked to refugees who fled in the middle of the night from Somalia, and their families were scattered and they didn't reunite until years afterwards. Yes, they did not stop and pick up their passports and birth certificates. But the vast majority of Syrian refugees, they go through a long process, kind of similar to what this family went through. Should we leave? Should we stay? How bad is the fighting today? Maybe it'll get better tomorrow. Maybe we'll leave our house, which seems to be in sort of the the battle zone and we'll go to Uncle Ahmed's house, the other side of town. Then when things calm down, we'll go back again to our house. This is the typical life of someone living in a war-torn place like Syria. The last thing you want to do is to just pack up and leave your home. Because you know what happens? People go into the home and they steal everything. They loot it from, from top to bottom, and you're basically never going to go back. So there's usually a long period of time. They might even have, when you're in an emergency situation, maybe you're 9 months pregnant, you have a little bag packed, because you never know when you're going to be rushed to the hospital. A lot of refugees have that. So more than you think, documents are brought with refugees. In fact, that's their lives. Wouldn't you bring it? All of these, certificates, family photos. Yeah, and they look at family photos too. And now, more and more, they're also looking at social media posts of refugees. They're going through all of that now. Okay, yes, right here.
Quick question, do you feel there's any hope whatsoever of that 50,000 cap being raised over the next 4 years?
Yeah, I do. I think there is hope that it'll be raised. I think that the Trump administration has miscalculated. I think they felt there aren't that many people like you, and if there are, they're probably all clustered together in Connecticut. And there's not going to be any pushback. I mean, seriously, the Trump administration is saying, seriously, who's going to stick their neck out for refugees? Well, I think we're going to see across the country a lot of people. Look, the Republicans support refugee resettlement. The Republican Party supports refugee resettlement. We get support from both sides of the aisle. So I'm hoping that someone will, have his ear and say, hey, we don't need to go that low. We can make a point without going that low. Yes?
Hi, I was struck by the question on San Bernardino and what visa how did they get in? So can you just put the refugee number in perspective? I mean, how many visas does the U.S. government grant? I mean, the temporary visa for business or tourist.
I know about the refugee program. I don't know about other visas for people coming from Pakistan.
But those are the kinds of numbers that I would need to talk to my relatives in Ohio, a very red state, if I'm going to make any sense of it for them.
Yes, you're right.
So I mean,
we should get that information, and it puts the refugee process in perspective, like you say.
Exactly.
The vetting process that refugees go through compared to the vetting process that people from other countries who do not come through the refugee program go through. Yes. Thank you.
Can't hear you.
The Pakistani woman in the San Bernardino case came on a fiancé visa. I don't know what the specifics are for that visa.
The husband was born in the States.
The husband was born here,
and so that's a testament
she
to
came
ISIS,
through a fiancé.
That's right.
Maybe, I don't know enough, I should know more about how tough, how rigorous the screening process is for fiancé visas.
Frank.
Oh, look, he's taking the easy way. We're right next to him. Sorry, I wanted you to have a fight.
I was hoping you could go back to that question of what we can do besides advocacy, especially to send the message that we, as a big part of the country, support refugees and immigration.
Besides advocacy.
Which I assume means calling and sending letters.
Yeah, and organizing forums like this. I mean, imagine if we had, more of these happening, and I'm always available. We are going to look for ways to engage community groups in helping the refugees who have already been resettled. We now have 4 community groups who have been trained. They've given us the green light. They're waiting for a family. They probably won't get one anytime soon. So we're going to really crank up our volunteer program. So have you worked with refugees? Not yet? Great. You will have an opportunity, and all of you, you'll speak with so much more authority if you said, you know, Monday and Wednesdays, 3 hours a day, I tutor a refugee kid. So I can tell you, you know, they're real people. You'll be able to, you know, hopefully once we really gear up this program, you'll be able to work with refugees that we've resettled. Outside of advocacy and direct service, I don't know if there is much of anything else. You got a house with a big living room, invite some people over. Don't worry, I won't turn it into a fundraiser and, you know, make you uncomfortable. It'll just be purely educational. So, you know, you can do that. You've got friends in other states. There are refugee resettlement agencies in every state. You can see if maybe someone from those agencies can come and talk. I know you're frustrated, I'm sorry. I wish there was more.
I keep hearing about these people hosting Syrian dinners, this sort of thing. Do you encourage that?
Yeah, great idea. We have now 360 Syrians in Connecticut. They're all great cooks. Yeah, that's a terrific idea. Syrianite, yeah. I mean, be careful though. There are refugees other than Syrians. You know, we still have a lot of Afghans, and Afghan food is great too. You know, Afghan meal. That's a great idea.
We have time for one more question.
And then I'll be around afterwards if you have more questions. I'll hang around.
I have a similar question. Recently, you sent a call out that you needed dishes in pots and pans or something like that. And I'm one of these people who does like some practical kinds of things. Is there anything in particular like that that you need now?
Yes, we will always need dishes and pots and pans. Our warehouses are going to fill up with furniture pretty soon if we're not setting up apartments, but that's okay. If you've got furniture, always let us know. So close your eyes and imagine an empty apartment that needs to be set up for a family of 4. We need everything. No clothing. No, we are buried under clothing. People have been so generous with clothing, we don't need any more. So, yes,
How do we go
anything.
about giving you money for people who want to support you?
Well, always, Donald Trump is cutting us about $220,000. So we need to replace that in order to meet our budget for this year.
Before you leave, I want to remind you that on your cards that were given out, there is the IRIS website and phone number on the card. And also on the other side is our next community event is Muslims, our Shoreline neighbors and friends, with Imam Sami Aziz, and it'll be here at the library in this room on April 7th at 7 o'clock. So we want to thank you all for being here.